Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. This is the Leadership and Management webinar series. My name is Shannon McDonald, and I am the Associate Director of Corporate Education and Custom Training at UC San Diego Extension. I'm so happy to see you all here today and happy that you're joining us for this great presentation. So today we are talking about understanding unconscious bias in the workplace, and our speaker today is Nuala Campany. She is PhD and specializes in talent management and organizational development. We're very excited to have her. She's been teaching with us for a few years now, and it's a real treat to have her here. So I just wanted to share the agenda with you today. So welcome again. I wanted to make sure you knew that this session is being recorded and it will be made available to you after today's presentation. We will share that with you within probably about a week's time via email if you're attending today. So we'll do the Q&A after the session today. And so we really want you to encourage participating via the chat box. We also have a couple polls today, so it will be an interactive session, so feel free to use that chat box. So next, I want to talk to you a little bit about UCSD Extension. So we are the continuing education arm of the university. We've been around for nearly 60 years now, and we specialize in professional development and personal enrichment programs. We have about 4,500 courses, 100 different certificate programs, really focusing in on critical skill development and real world knowledge. Like speakers like Nuala, we engage practitioners in the field to teach our courses so that you learn today and apply tomorrow. We have both online, in-class, and hybrid options. Of course, right now, primarily online, but soon enough, we'll get back into the classroom. So in line with some of these topics we're talking about today, I wanted to share a little bit about the leadership programs we have. We have several offerings for entry level to mid-managers to executives. And you can see here we have everything from workshops and webinars like today to certificate programs to longer format programs as well. Many of these programs, including those last two that you see there, the LAMP and EPSI programs, are some of our most esteemed programs, have been a staple in our community here for over 30 years. I also want to let you know that programs like the leadership programs that I mentioned there and any of our other programs can be brought on site to organizations. They can be fully customized to meet your employees' needs. And so we do encourage you, if you are looking for training options, to go ahead and reach out to us. As you can see here, they're custom, flexible, and proven to work in order to strengthen your organization. Finally, before we get started, I wanted to share with you that we have some upcoming webinars after today's session. So looks like here we have another 6 coming up between now and the end of September. So I do encourage you to continue to take part in these. It's a great opportunity. And you can find out more about these sessions and register at extension.ucsd.edu/levelup. And now we're going to get on with the show. I welcome Nuala Campany. And again, we're talking about understanding unconscious bias in the workplace, a very important topic for today, Nuala. And we're so excited again that you're here to share your wisdom with us and everything that we need to be considerate of in today's workplace.
All right, well, Shannon, thank you very much for the introduction. I just wanted to point out for anyone who's having issues with sound, there are a couple of super helpful suggestions in the chat. So thank you for that. So I wanted to say welcome to everybody. I'm really excited to be here to talk about, this topic that really is, I think, taking up a lot of kind of mind share right now. Just a tiny bit about myself. I have probably about 25 years of experience in organization talent development, as Shannon mentioned. And I feel really fortunate to have had a very global career as both an internal and external consultant in roles that have spanned, Europe, Asia Pacific, the Middle East, and Africa, and across a broad range of industries. So most recently, I spent the last 11 years or so at Qualcomm in a talent organization development role. I actually retired about 2 years ago, and since then I've been teaching in the Cal State system as well as for UCSD Extension, and doing a little bit of consulting, traveling when we were able to, and then riding my horse Joey in my free time. So to get started, let me just pop up my slides. Okay, so what would be really cool is to just, we have a lot of people on the call, and it would be super cool to just hear where everybody's joining us from today. So let's give you a minute to just pop in the chat where you're joining from. I know Shannon
San
is
Diego,
monitoring the chat.
we're gonna start Memphis, Tennessee, Toronto, Pittsburgh, London, oh,
London, my hometown.
Seattle, more San Diegans, Santa Cruz, Austin, Texas, London, Frankfurt, Chicago, Dallas, Monterey, Orlando, all over.
Great, that's
Probably
exciting.
Nashua, New Hampshire, Sonoma County. We've got them from all over the world. This is awesome.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the sort of upsides, one of the silver linings of, this COVID-19 pandemic. It's kind of making the world a little bit smaller sometimes.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so great to sort of welcome everybody. So we just start a quick look at the agenda. Just to really start with, definition of, what is unconscious bias, and then really looking at, which is, what's the impact on diversity and inclusion? Because obviously I think that's really top of mind right now. And then we'll briefly look at, something that we can learn from neuroscience about unconscious bias, as well as kind of a little bit of a dive into some different types of bias, and then looking at what are some strategies that we can use to overcome them and create, a more inclusive workplace. And then finally, wrap up and make sure that we have some time at the end for questions and answers. So that's kind of the plan for today. So let's start with, what is unconscious bias, right? And we sometimes hear the term implicit bias, so I'll probably use them interchangeably, but it's really the same thing. So really what we're referring to are the kind of quick and often inaccurate judgments that we make based on limited facts and our own life experiences. And these judgments can give individuals and groups both unearned advantage and also unearned disadvantage in the workplace. And people can be biased just about anything, not just things like gender, color, age, but also things like communication styles or what someone does in their free time. So just kind of moving on here. So what we know is that unconscious biases are, they're non-conscious drivers, they're cognitive quirks that influence how people see the world. They appear to be universal in most of humanity, hardwired by into our brain as part of our genetic or cultural heritage. And they exert influence outside of our conscious awareness. So you can't go shopping or enter a conversation or make a decision without your biases kicking in. Okay. So the other thing too is that unconscious biases can be contrary to our consciously stated beliefs. So I may say that I'm committed to, hiring a diverse team, and yet, when I look around, everyone on my team looks just like me. We have similar educational backgrounds and experience sets. And then the thing too we know is that unconscious biases are triggered by kind of the automatic mental associations we make between people, ideas, objects, and attitudes, and stereotypes that we hold about those people, ideas, and attitudes. So this bias is not intentional. It's part of the lens through which we see the world. In our everyday lives, when people fit into our internalized expectations, our mental models, we can sometimes have difficulty seeing their talents, their motivations, and potential clearly, and which means that we can interact with them effectively. When we understand how biases influence our behavior, we can take action to create an inclusive culture, one where everyone can contribute, innovate, and provide solutions that, that our customers love. So on the whole, biases are helpful and adaptive. They enable people to make quick, effective, efficient decisions and judgments with minimal cognitive effort. And we're going to see that that's important. For example, if you think, how many times have you actually driven home? It's light traffic, you get home and you have no memory of that journey. Okay, that's where the kind of those mental kind of associations are happening and working for us. The thing is, though, that you know, unconscious biases can also bind us to new information or inhibit us from considering valuable options when making an important decision. So, as David Ross says, the director of the Neuro Leadership Institute, if you have a brain, you have a bias. You know, as much as difficult as it may be to admit, it's possible to be unconsciously biased regarding race, gender, age, social class, and many other sources of difference. You know, could your decision not to hire one person versus another be based on their social class? You know, we wanted to ask ourselves these questions. So let's just kind of look at what are the sources of these biases? Where do they come from? So, you know, biases are parts that are formed based on our own experience, things other people tell us, media portrayals, a huge one, institutional influences, for example, education, and other external influences. You know, so when it's a situation, people appear to fit into these mental map, our mind has created, we make a number of automatic associations, and not surprisingly, our perceptions and assumptions based on these automatic associations are often incorrect. You know, we've all grown up in a culture, you can think of it as a fog that we've kind of been breathing our whole lives, and we've never even realized that fog causes association can lead to bias. For example, in the United States, if I say peanut butter, then the automatic association that Americans would make is jam, or jam as I would call it. You know, peanut butter and jelly go together. It's, you know, it's the association is ingrained in us. So that's a very benign of associations. But in many forms of media, there are overrepresentations of Black men, especially young Black men, with violence and criminality. So subconsciously, we may come to think of Black men as violent and aggressive. You know, that's a lot less benign example. And because our unconscious biases are hidden, it takes work to disrupt them. But it can be done through active reflection and practicing inclusive behaviors. And doing this work, it benefits not just us, but the people around us and the organizations in which we work. So at this point, I did want to take a minute to situate our session today in a broader context. You know, we're seeing a lot of increased interest in the topic of implicit bias, and it does provide an opportunity to open and deepen important conversations in our organizations, in our communities about equity, belonging, and ultimately justice. Most work on implicit bias focuses on increasing awareness of individuals in service of changing how we view and treat others, and that's really the focus of our workshop today. But however, to lead to meaningful change, an exploration of implicit bias must be situated as part of a much larger conversation about how current inequities in our institutions came to be, you know, how they're held in place, and what our role as leaders is in perpetuating inequities despite our good intentions. So our success in creating organizations and communities in which everyone has access to the opportunities they need to thrive depends on our ability to really confront our history and the impacts of, you know, structural racism, learn how implicit bias operates, and take action to interrupt these inequities both at the interpersonal, the institutional, and the structural level. So thinking just a little bit kind of at the sort of organizational level, you know, thinking about the workplace, where is some, you know, the transition, where might unconscious bias impact our decision making in the workplace? And I just give everyone an opportunity to just put some suggestions in the chat at this point.
Hiring decisions, somebody says.
Yeah.
Recruitment, hiring process, customer service, promotions,
Yeah.
performance reviews, meeting new coworkers, storytelling, Selecting team members, project assignments, communication, promotions, hires.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that one about storytelling. I think that's very powerful because
Leadership roles.
Yeah. You know, we think about the stories we tell in the organization and how those really kind of underpin the culture. So yeah, I think I heard pretty much everyone that's on this slide. You know, so yes, hiring, compensation, feedback. There are a lot of, you know, there are many, many places where, you know, an unconscious bias can have an impact that disadvantages or advantages, you know, so that's really something to think about in our organizations. Another thing to think about in our organizations is that kind of link between unconscious bias and diversity and inclusion. You know, there's sort of the potential impact that this can have on the areas of innovation, engagement, and business results. So thinking about engagement, you know, there's you know, we know that there's a very strong research tells us that there's a strong connection between, you know, employee engagement, retention, and productivity. And there's back in June there was a McKinsey study that kind of looked at some of these areas, and what they found was that a sense of inclusion is strongly linked with engagement, and respondents who felt very included were much more likely to say that they were fully engaged and excited and committed to their organizations. So few statistics among respondents who feel very included, nearly 3/4 said that they were entirely engaged in the organization. By comparison, there's just 1/4 of respondents who did not feel, you know, they said, you know, we do not feel very included, and they, you know, and the sort of, as a result, they said that they really were not engaged. And then finally, you know, responses also suggested that an inclusive environment in which employees feel strong, positive bonds that enable better performance is a really important consideration as they plan their careers. And in fact, 39% of all the respondents said they'd actually turned down a position or a job because they perceived a lack of inclusion in the organization. So this is definitely something employees are paying attention to. We also, you know, consider the impact on innovation. We know that from research that diverse teams, while they may take longer to get fully up to speed, make better decisions and are more innovative than teams with homogeneous membership. So, you know, obviously that speaks to the importance of kind of the diverse points of view, really sort of leading to sort of the best solutions. And then finally, you know, when we think about the impact of on customers and markets, treating employees well is one of the highest impact ways to communicate an organization's values and strengthen relationships with customers and clients. Clearly, for an organization to be successful, it needs to understand diverse customers, markets well enough to be an essential part of, you know, and an exciting part of their lives, and obviously, you know, with ensuing impact on, you know, the organization's financial success. Okay, so what we do know as well, we've kind of been talking about how bias comes in many different forms. So I have a few examples here. You know, what assumption do you think someone might make based on the following characteristics? Someone with bright green hair versus someone with a conservative hairstyle. Having had green hair as a teenager, a deeply religious person versus someone with religious beliefs. A graduate of a prestigious university versus public university, or someone with just a high school diploma. And then we have the age one, a new college graduate versus someone mid-career versus someone near retirement. What we do know is that employees who differ from most of their colleagues in, you know, things like religion, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, and generation often hide important parts of themselves at work for negative. And for this is it actually has a name. It's called identity cover. And what it does is it makes it difficult to know these employees feel what they want, and that definitely makes them more vulnerable to leaving. So what does this mean for me? Oh, someone else got the sport one. So what does it mean for me? Just give everyone just a moment more as a reflective exercise. Thinking about people you feel most comfortable with, thinking about people that you feel less comfortable with, and sort of just a couple questions there about thinking diverse points, and what can we do better? Give everyone just a minute to just think about that, just to reflect. If it's helpful to just jot on a few things, or if you want to put something in the chat, you're also welcome to do that. Okay, Shannon, is there anything in the chat? Okay, great. Then I'm going to move on. I think it's really, reflection is a really important, and I encourage everyone to think deeply about this. Okay, so let's just for a minute learn from neuroscience. Back in the day when I was at graduate school studying applied linguistics, the only way we could really study language development was recording speech to children, or studying people who'd had strokes that had disrupted their language pattern. Today, I mean, the last years, we have a lot of very sophisticated fMRI imaging, and that's allowed us to really study what happens in the normal brain under all kinds of situations. And that's really given us some key insights, decision making, and the role that bias, emotions play. So I wanted to just, there's a lot of stuff out there, but I think one of the actually, before we do that, I want to do a quick poll. We have a poll made process, so this will just give us a sense of, just really how much work our brains do. So research estimates that the human brain takes in about 1 million pieces of information per second through all of our different senses. So here's the question: out of those 11 million pieces of information, how many do you think our brain is consciously aware of? And Shannon's going to launch the poll. You guys are good. The answer is actually 40. So, our brain is consciously aware of only about 40 pieces of information per second. So while we think that we're being deliberate, rational, and thoughtful, our conscious thinking is actually a very small part of what drives our actions and judgments. Okay, so no matter how well-meaning we are, we're all susceptible to bias. It's our brain's way of making sense of this flood of information that's coming at us constantly. So I'm going to close the poll. But 50%, that's pretty good. All right, so let's kind of dive in a little bit deeper into kind of what we're learning from neuroscience. So I'm not sure how many people have heard of Daniel Kahneman or familiar with his book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. He's an Israeli-American cognitive psychologist. And what's really pretty distinctive is that he actually won the Nobel Prize for Economic Sciences along with with Amos Tversky for his work on behavioral economics. So it's pretty unusual for a psychologist to win the Nobel Prize for economics. So the book, it's a big book, it's over 400 pages. So and I have actually in the references at the end, you'll find there's a link to not only the book, but also a really good little YouTube video that kind of summarizes some of the key points. So just what he really talks about is these two systems of thinking when it comes to considering judgment and choice. The first system is it's fast and automatic in comparison with the second system, which is slower and more deliberate. So let's just spend a minute, let's talk about system one. All right, so system one, that's the fast system, and it's thinking done almost automatically or instinctively, and thinking with very little effort from the person and no feeling of control. And this is the system of thinking that's incredibly influential, much more than you think, as it influences almost all of our kind of regular judgments and choices. So answering a simple question like 2 + 2 = 4, or knowing that the second part of the phrase bread and is butter, that's due to the sort of this first system one of thinking. So it executes these kind of skilled responses and generates skilled intuitions after it's had adequate training. System 2, on the other hand, is the slow thinking, and Kahneman explains that it's the system that involves thinking that's more complex and more mentally draining. It takes concentration and agency of the person in the process of these thoughts. So it explains, and what he says is that system 2 is easier to identify with because it's the conscious self. It's the version of you that makes decisions, makes choices, has reason and beliefs. And in order to monitor your own behavior in certain situations, or to increase your natural walking pace, for example, you'd be tapping into system 2. Now, because it's automatic and intuitive, system 1 can serve us very well when we saw how much information is going through our brain every second. But we often trust it and our immediate reactions when we really shouldn't. And that's what can lead to mistakes. So that's just kind of a little bit around system 1 and system 2 thing. And as we can see, system 1 is where we have to really pay attention, because this is, with automatic nature, that's where, the sort of unconscious biases can really kick in. So at this point, I just want to turn to look briefly at some different categories of bias. Okay, so we've got, if you do a Google search on unconscious bias or implicit bias, you're going to turn up about 150 different biases. So to help us out, researchers what they've done is they've kind of categorized these 150 biases into like 5 main categories, kind of based on their sort of cognitive nature. And the Neuroleadership Institute has kind of developed this model called the SEEDS model. So that first S stands for similarity bias. The first E is for expedience. The next one, experience. And then D is the distance biases. And then S are safety biases. So we'll just spend a minute or two kind of looking at each of those, and then really also, because once we understand the kind of bias we're dealing with, then it's a lot easier to put into place a strategy to kind of help mitigate. So let's take a look at that. Start with the similarity biases, and that's the one, people like me are better than others. So this is kind of our natural tendency to want to promote and protect those who kind of are closely associated with me. And that's where we have the issues around in and out group preference, where I'm more likely to ascribe favorable characteristics to the in group and less favorable characteristics to people that I consider to be in the out group. Okay. So some things to look out for, this is especially in the area of people decisions, and then thinking about sort of some actions we can take. I know a lot of companies do things like remove personal identifying information from like resumes in hiring, really focusing on kind of what are the requirements for the role when we're hiring, creating shared group goals across groups of people. So we're all working towards the same goals. There's actually a summary at the very end of the slides that Shannon will send out that captures all of this information in a kind of a one-page format. So then thinking about expedience biases. Okay, this is the one, if it feels right, must be true. This is definitely the mental shortcuts that enable us to make quick and efficient decisions. So this is that system 1 versus system 2 thinking. So the experience biases can result when we allow kind of our belief about something to influence how we evaluate information. So I'm going to actually, Shannon, I think let's do that little poll. All right, so I have a question. What do you think is more likely, Do you think you're more likely to die from a shark attack or from being hit by parts falling from an airplane? What do people think? Ooh, it's kind of neck and neck.
Neck and neck, yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. Oh, who's gonna win? Who's gonna win? The suspense. All right. I think they're done. Here we go. Ready?
Yes.
There it is.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
okay, well, aeroplane parts are actually, it is more likely to be, that is more likely to be the source of your death than shark attack. But a lot of the times we choose shark attack because shark attacks are just way more widely reported. You know, they make the front page, and especially here in San Diego, if anyone sees a shark, you know, it's on every news channel. So we're just more familiar with that information, which is why we're more likely to choose that as an answer. Although you guys are really smart. Another experience bias that we're probably all familiar with is the planning fallacy. Which is where we have the tendency to underestimate how long something's going to take, how much it will cost, and then you know, its associated risks, while overestimating the benefits. So anyone who's ever done a kitchen remodel will probably understand that one. So thinking about, you know, what to look out for. You know, hurried decisions. This is where when we're making kind of obvious choices. So some things, you know, breaking problems into smaller chunks, adding more time for reflection, and, you know, creating incentives for people to actually identify their own mistakes, you know, are all good strategies to employ here. So moving on to kind of experience biases, that's where, you know, I really believe that my perceptions are accurate. Kahneman calls it what we see is all there is. Okay, so and obviously our expectations are covered by, you know, our current emotional state, our personality, our past experience, expectations. This really, I think, a really good time where we kind of hit this one is when we're really trying to influence or sell an idea. You know, I'm like really all gung-ho on this idea, and as I present it, I see that not everyone thinks the same way as I do about this. So that can be a huge shock, you know, and is the cause of kind of a lot of misunderstandings among people who work together. So things that we can do, you know, look out for, you know, when we need a creative decision, you know, non-consciously we prefer our own ideas. So that's where getting multiple independent opinions, you know, revisiting ideas after we've had a break. You know, let's sleep on this and come back to it tomorrow. Getting, you know, taking another perspective. You know, how would this feel if I was the customer or the client? How would this feel if I was an employee? You know, putting ourselves in that other person's shoes. And then I think kind of one that we're all really sort of experiencing right now is this whole thing around distance biases, you know, where, you know, the headline here, near is stronger than far. It turns out that the closer an object or an individual or an outcome is in space or time or perceived ownership, I give it greater value. So there are all kinds of little experiments that show if you offer people $100 today versus $150 3 months from now, they still want the $100 today, though the $150 is actually a better investment. So this is kind of where we get into short-term thinking, and really importantly in the workplace, how we end up neglecting people or projects that are removed from us. So, you know, that's when we think about, you know, I mean, when we think about, you know, how many times have we not included someone on a call because they're not co-located with us? Or, you know, what time do we put conference calls? Is it convenient for everyone, or is it just in my work day? So really thinking about, especially now where so many of us are working remotely, you know, that's really kind of, you know, I think we've all suddenly found ourselves in this situation. And then the last set of biases we'll talk about are the safety biases. And human beings we're hardwired to prefer, we will do really anything to avoid loss. Okay, that's actually stronger. Loss aversion is actually stronger than kind of our motivation to win. And what we see sometimes in organizations is around sort of negative information being more salient and motivating than positive. So at both Qualcomm and when I worked at Johnson & Johnson, I worked on our employee climate survey. And what was really interesting was that when we, without fail, negative comments on the survey received far greater attention from our leadership, even when the quantitative data was overwhelmingly positive for that given survey item. So we are definitely more influenced by negative information. So, this is where we have to look out for, am I being risk adverse? So some things we can do, imagine that I'm, deciding for someone else, or, do that pre-mortem, the decision's already been made, how did it work out? Or if I look back, if I pretend we're 5 years from now and I look back on this decision, and then, or pretend, get someone, pretend I'm making the decision for someone else. A friend of mine, she always gets her husband to negotiate for the car she wants. So that it takes the emotion out of it and the sort of the risk aversion of not getting it at the price you want. So a very quick tour through kind of some of those kind of common sets of 5 categories of bias. So when we think about managing for bias, we know that bias is universal. We also know that it's very difficult to kind of monitor for bias in the moment in which you're making the decision. And that we really need to focus on, when we see here, we'll talk a little bit more about this concept of individual cognitive effort not being sufficient. What we really need to do is to focus on what are the bias countering processes that place a premium on cognitive effort over intuition or gut. So that is kind of, especially when we know making a critical decision, what am I putting in place to kind of make sure that I'm engaging system 2 versus system 1 thinking. So on that individual cognitive effort being insufficient, a short video here from Mazaran Banaji, who's actually the co-author of Blind Spot. She's a psychologist at Harvard. So I'm going to just very quickly stop sharing this and we'll move quickly to the video. Because as she says, change comes when individuals and organizations act together. So I'm going to share. Volume up. I have the she goes.
Our brains are really complex machines. They do so much. And any complex machine has to have shortcuts. And one of the things our brain does is that it learns. It learns from certain kinds of experiences. It learns from what people tell it. And it uses that in a new context without having to think about it again. There are certain ideas that are coming through at me of what's good in our society, what's not so good. And implicit bias is really a creation of all of these forces. Our biology, how our minds pick things up, how we churn this information in our head, and then how we spit it out when we have to make a decision, like who you're gonna hire, okay? Who looks dangerous to me. Think about implicit bias as the thumbprint of the culture on our brain. We carry it around with us. We don't even know that we have it. And yet it emerges. Something that we do know from the scientific literature is that mandatory training does not work. You bring people into a room and you succumb them to what you call diversity training, and what you will produce is either no effect or you will actually see a reverse effect. Your workforce will become less diverse. But if you do your training in a voluntary way, where people are encouraged to come, and you make your training exciting, interesting, smart, then there is a chance that that training is going to take effect. we should know that change is going to come when individuals and organizations act together. It has to have an understanding that humans like me are going to be biased. What is it going to do to create procedures, to create ways in which we do our interviewing, the way in which we read a person's work? What are they going to require us to do? We really have to hold two groups of people responsible. What are the senior-most people in this organization doing about it? How are they implementing changes that will lead to better ways of hiring, recruiting, promotion, dealing with your clients, or how you run your own team? All of these processes need to be examined, evaluated, and improved. And then the individual has to step up and say, I'm going to do my piece every day. So to measure success, you can look at certain things. People often focus on the presence of a diversity of people in the organization. But I don't think that's the only thing, because even at the level of hiring, I'm watching lots of organizations hire more diversely. But people leave the organization in very different numbers. So it's not just the hiring and having them there, it's what is the environment like for a very, very different people, all of whom feel like, I want to get there to work today. So what are we doing? What is the health of a place? So when Starbucks tries to set aside a day to think about this, I think that's a wonderful thing. What they're signaling is that they care about this, that this is an important enough issue. But they should be absolutely aware that this day is not going to change practice. It takes a lot of work to make people give up their privileges.
Grab my other presentation. I think it's a very short but very powerful video. So just, I know I want to make sure we have time at the end for questions, so I'm going to move fairly quickly through the next piece. So Banaji was talking about kind of the health of the organization. What's the organizational climate like? You know, we think about, you know, what do we need to do to build an inclusive culture? Okay, that doesn't just happen by accident. You know, it requires, as she's indicating, it requires sustained effort. And if we think about the hallmarks of an inclusive culture, you know, that's, you know, at its core, that's where, you know, an organization creates an environment in which everybody feels that they have an opportunity to add value. People can work together more effectively. Everyone understands each other's roles, and, you know, diverse points of view and contributions, and, you know, and that's how, you know, really the team can really work together to achieve its goals and the organization's mission. So thinking about kind of what are some of those actions that we can take, first of all, kind of at the leadership level, you know, we think about, you know, the video talked about, you know, we do a lot of work goes into hiring diverse set of individuals, but, you know, what are we doing inside the organization to, you know, to make sure that we are focused on inclusive behaviors, that our practices are meritocratic, especially, you know, performance evaluation, and then thinking about things like access to senior leaders. You know, is there the sponsorship, are there those sort of substantive interactions between leaders and employees that really lead to career growth? So those are kind of some of the things at the kind of organizational level, and I know a lot of people on the call are leaders in their own organizations. And then thinking about what can we do kind of at the individual level. We're hearing a lot about micro behaviors or microaggressions, as they're sometimes called, which, you know, these are the small messages that we convey each day through kind of our body language, our tone of voice, you know, how close we stand to another person. And when these micro behaviors kind of recur over time, they do send extremely powerful signals that have a huge impact on engagement at work and how we perceive ourselves and others. You know, so to give a few examples, you know, things like facial expression, tone of voice, body language, our choice of behaviors. I once reported to someone who would take personal calls during a one-on-ones. It made me feel super unimportant. You know, the questions and interactions, you know, if I'm the person who's always kind of remote, how easy is it for me to get my voice heard? And then things like eye contact, extremely important in showing kind of that I value someone's input and opinions. Yeah. So those are just a few examples of kind of microaggressions. So thinking about, what does it mean for me? I'd encourage everybody to think about, just thinking about the examples we've just discussed. Can you identify times when you might have displayed microaggressions or micro behaviors in these ways, or you experienced that as you being the recipient of that? How did it make you feel? So just sort of something to think about. And as I think, not only sort of monitoring our own behavior, but also as leaders in the organization, are we willing to call out team members on this? So really important in terms of kind of creating that inclusive environment. Misunderstandings and disagreements, they occur all the time in organizations, but we should really see them, if addressed, as really an opportunity to explore diverse perspectives and really come up with much better and more thoughtful solutions. So I cannot overstate kind of how important it is to ask questions, because just think back to a time when maybe someone made an incorrect assumption about your preferences, capabilities, or background. Would the situation have improved if the person had asked a question instead? So I encourage us all, anytime we find ourselves kind of making an assumption, why don't we ask a question instead? And then we kind of talked earlier about how bias is a shortcut our brains use, system one thinking to draw rapid conclusions. And this is especially likely to happen when we're in a stressful situation. So anything we can do to kind of reduce kind of the level of stress is going to definitely reduce the possibility of acting or speaking from a biased stance. So, really kind of thinking about what can I do? If I know this is going to be, high pressure, high stress, what can I do to kind of to manage that? And hopefully be speaking from a less biased stance. And then I think, obviously this one, making sure that all voices are heard, making sure that, we're giving, that space to everybody on our team. I think that this brings me just to that last quote that comes from the video that I really like. Implicit bias comes from culture. We think of it as the thumbprint of culture on our minds, and we have the ability to learn to associate two things together very quickly. That's innate, and what we choose, but what we teach ourselves, what we choose to associate, that's up to us. So I think that that is really kind of a very important thing. We know that the good news really is that while we may not be able to eliminate bias and prejudice, that's impossible to do it completely, but there are degrees of bias and prejudice, and so the field of neuroscience has shown us that our brains have the potential to grow and develop throughout our lifespan. And so that means that while we cannot, avoid mentally absorbing some of the negative stereotypes that do permeate our culture, the associations and unconscious biases that we internalize, that's what's malleable. So I realize that we are coming up on probably like 5+ minutes left. So I wanted to give everyone a chance for questions. And I think we can use the chat for that.
Yes, we already have a couple of comments,
All right.
questions. So actually, Carlos, thank you for your feedback. And it's something that I hear you on, but he said, a great microaggression example might be of unconscious bias might be holding a meeting in a platform that doesn't provide closed captioning or live transcription.
Right.
So case in point, thank you for that feedback, and I can appreciate how that can be frustrating. So, and Nuala, so I don't know if you have a comment on that too.
Yeah, no, I've been, this summer I took a series of courses at Cal State, all about putting our materials online for the fall, and I learned an enormous amount about that. I was completely oblivious, and when I learned that, probably I think I think probably about 5% of our students are actually registered with some form of disability, but that the university knows that there are many, many more people who, who require some kind of accommodation. So it was sobering for me, and I absolutely hear that.
Yeah, so we have a couple things here. Years back, we used to talk a lot about paradigms.
Yeah, paradigm shift.
That's the biases. So that was our first question.
Right. So I guess if I'm reading it correctly, I would think of paradigm like a mental model. This is kind of my mental model for this. And those are kind of what can inform our biases. So I may have, my mental model of who makes a good talent management consultant, right? I have a sort of mental picture of that. And that's, it's not all biases, but we can, it can advantage some while it advantages others.
And then she says, would you say biases on people is the worst?
I think certainly it's a really good one.
Such as recruitment and promotion, in this context.
I think certainly when we think about, sort of the impact on individuals in organizations, that those kind of biases around people are they're widespread, and they can be very impactful. I think also, there's a whole area we didn't get into around when we think about kind of decisions that we make on all kinds of things, not necessarily people related, where bias also plays a part. Sort of like, making one, sort of investing in this versus that, not looking at the opportunity costs. I love
Kimberly
that.
Says she doesn't have a question, but one of my takeaways is if the diversity is not an indicator of a successful inclusion program or plan. So
yeah, I love that point.
So Robin says, what are some good techniques for creating time or space for thinking slowly in today's high stress, fast acting environment due to the pandemic and working remote?
Oh, right. I love that question. I think that, there's a lot of stuff I'm seeing kind of coming out on self-care, actually kind of giving ourselves a break. It's so easy to be stuck in front of Zoom, all day, no lunch, no break. So I think there's some things that are like that. And I've also found breathing exercises very helpful. I horse ride, and I can be a very nervous show jumper. And I've kind of learned how to, work on relaxation through breathing. And when you breathe and you count your breaths, you interrupt your sort of amygdala, and that kind of brings the stress level down. So sometimes if you find yourself in like a tense situation in a meeting, just doing some simple hold out, and you can do it very unobtrusively, that can really help.
Absolutely. Taking a moment.
Yeah.
Somebody said here, sorry, let me scroll back up. How do recruitment or talent management teams reconcile candidate expectations, such as polished appearance and dress and an interviewee being well-spoken, but not practicing implicit bias about class or education level?
Right. That's really a great question. So I think one of the things is really being clear on what are the requirements for the role. And when we really focus on that, and we take out the fact that the person had a tattoo or a piercing, or, that's sort of like, just set that aside for a minute. Let's look at the candidate's qualifications. And also spending the same amount of time with each candidate is really important, because that, the person you spent the hour with interviewing, you're much more likely to be favorable than that person you rushed through in 15 minutes. So really kind of trying to level the playing field.
Carlos says, could you please take a moment to talk about ableism and how inclusivity should always be intersectional?
Oh my goodness, that's a tough one. Yeah, if I understand it correctly, so we're looking at how people are differently abled. I think that's how I understand it. That when we're talking about inclusion, it's really looking at from many different. I'm not answering as well. This is a difficult question. I'm paying so much, I may be paying so much attention to, look at one type of potential bias that I am not looking at other ways, so I think it is that, and I just saw another thing pop up, so it's kind of hard. So I think it's really sort of, well, there's so many questions here. And I know I didn't answer that question very well, but I think it is sort of
consider, and so and something maybe we can continue as a group, thinking about this after the fact, right? So
yeah,
the opposite of unconscious bias. I think it's better to focus on whatever that term is, if there is one.
right.
What are some suggestions for individuals who are not directly involved with
Right.
recruiting, hiring? How do we help support diversity within our company?
Right. Well, I think that's, there's so many things we can do at individual levels. So we may not be directly responsible for hiring, etc., but I'm responsible for making everybody on my team feel welcome and included. So, what can I do to help mentor, coach, if I have a new person joining the team, I do to make sure that that person, feels really part of the team, especially if they are somehow different to everybody else on the team. I think that's really important.
And I'm going to do one more here just due to time. What are your tips for building inclusion when there isn't much support from leadership? Can
Right.
organizational norms change from the bottom up, and where could one begin?
Yeah, so I think that's yeah, really tough. I think there's things we do individually, right? That's my own work, right? And I can be responsible and in charge of that. And if there are ways for raising the question in a way that is that is respectful, whether it's through kind of comments on if your company has an employee survey, or if there's a way to raise questions to your management, maybe your direct manager or all hands, doing it in a way that's respectful, I think is but getting that question out, the more it gets out, the more that leadership has to respond. And I think also when we have data. So, for example, we, all this effort to bring in, diverse employees, and then when we look at retention, promotion rates, etc., that can really say very loudly to, what the job is doing once we have the people in the organization.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for. There's a couple of other wonderful questions here. And for those, I think this just begins the conversation, in my humble opinion. I think we've gotten a lot of thinking, and that's what we need to be doing now.
Right.
Thinking about where we see ourselves and how we can take some actions as you've laid out today, whether that be in our workplace or personal environments. But thank you, Nuala, so very, very much. I think this has been very, very helpful for everyone here. We keep getting a lot of thank yous here, so a lot of good information. Just a quick reminder that the Leadership and Management webinar series does continue. Lots more to come this month and next month, so feel free to, again, register for those events at our website. And again, thank you everyone for attending. Nuala, thank you again for all your sharing your wisdom and getting us thinking about this very important topic.
Right. Well, thank you, everybody. And I really appreciated all the questions and comments. It makes for a very rich experience. And, we're all kind of just the beginning of this journey, I think, and all kind of figuring it out. So thank you.
Thank you.